Please don't say this was the one about abortion. I don't want to talk about it. Oh, fuck. Please don't be about abortion. Hello?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, fuck, it's about abortion. All right,
Aww.
hit me with it, dude. Let's go. Have you heard me argue about this
I'm not
before?
on camera.
Oh, shit, you don't
hear
even
me?
have... Yeah, I can't even, like, show anything on stream,
Hey.
so you don't have to use a camera. It's okay.
All right, hold on.
It might even cause more lag.
I had to pause the stream for a second, so I hear a slight delay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can you speak again?
Yep, can you hear me?
So,
Uh-oh.
there.
I don't think your headphones are configured to hear me.
Okay, I'm gonna try to figure it out. Just a second.
Destiny, read transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. What about it? I'm pretty sure I'm already familiar with the concept. The idea that certain environments can produce biological effects that could have biological impacts on the next generation without it necessarily, like it
All
being.
right,
like
is it working now?
Wait, I don't know. Can you hear me?
No, I still can't fucking hear you.
Well,
This has never happened to me before. Hold on, let me try my settings. All right, I changed something.
testing 1 2.
Yes, now, yeah, I hear you now. Okay,
All right.
sorry about that.
No problem. All right. What have you heard my debates before?
I heard one from a few years back, and then I started to listen to the one that you uploaded recently, but then I was at work, so kind of turned it off about 10 minutes in. So
Gotcha.
let me see if I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Okay. You are for the legality of abortion because you understand the practical reasons, but you're morally opposed to it because pretty much just the idea of terminating a life upsets you, and you would want to minimize the numbers of abortions performed, which, I mean, I think everybody agrees with that. Nobody wants more abortions.
Sure. Yeah, that's close enough. Yeah, I think we can working definition. Yeah.
Okay. So, if I recall correctly, I think the guy that you're talking to, I don't know his name, but I think he was a YouTuber as well. He said something along the lines, or sorry, you said something along the lines of, what's the difference between terminating a pregnancy and like killing a 2-year-old that you don't want to take care of?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I don't remember if he had a good answer for that or not. Did he, or he didn't?
No, not really. Typically, the only answer you can draw is that one might be reliant on another person's body for some time, but
yeah. Well, pretty much my response to that is, well, with a fetus, when you have an abortion, the intent isn't malicious. It's not like people have abortions because they want to kill a fetus. They just want to not be pregnant anymore. And if there was artificial wombs where you could like safely transport the fetus to the artificial womb, and then some random pro-life person was forced to adopt the baby, that's kind of me being an asshole. I mean, I wouldn't be morally opposed to that, but the thing with what a 2-year-old is that you can always, I mean, I know states are different, but you can surrender your paternal rights. You can give a baby up for adoption. People do it all the time, and especially like infants. I mean, they have safe haven laws where you can drop off a baby, at a, sorry, my cat's meowing, fire station, hospital, all those places, and nothing legally will happen to you. And another major difference between terminating a pregnancy and a 2-year-old is that I understand that there's a lot of stress involved with having kids. I don't have kids myself. I obviously know people who do. There's a whole lot of shit that's involved with that. And I know it's a lot of shit. But it doesn't physically affect your body. There's no heartburn. There's no bloating, there's no extreme, I mean, I guess if you don't have a lot of sleep, but actual fatigue caused by the fetus, it's not using your nutrients. I mean, if you think about it, the risks with abortion, I know we have a lot of medical advances, but still, even to this day, you're 14 times more likely to die from complications of birth than over an abortion. So there's just a lot of risks that exist with pregnancy that don't necessarily exist with a newborn baby. And even a newborn baby, if you're overwhelmed with all the stress of a baby, I mean, assuming you have a good support network, you can bring the baby to the grandma, your neighbor, whoever, and they can take over that baby for a little while. But you can't just be like, man, I'm bloated, I'm vomiting, oh, this sucks. Hey, buddy of mine, do you mind transferring my fetus and watching over it for a day so I can go have a beer and just relax? Like, it doesn't really work that way. So I feel that those two can't really be compared. So that's just kind of my main reasoning there. So I get that a lot because I'm also a content creator. I am very small. I don't have a following at all. I have like 400 subs. And my most popular video was a video I did on abortion. And it was like, I was rated by lifers. And of course, YouTube comments, it was all mean shit. And there was one comment that honestly, like, I don't know if you would agree with them, but it was probably one of the stupidest things I've ever read, because I was talking about bodily autonomy and how the government doesn't have the government can't force you to use your organs to sustain someone else's life. That, the whole organ donation and blood donation, that kind of thing. Like corpses, if you die, you're not an organ donor. They can't cut you open. They can't take your kidney to save someone else's life. That kind of extends over to the pregnancy thing, because a fetus is, I'm not going to say it's not life. It is life. It's a human being, but it's a human being that's dependent on you, and it requires your constant consent to use your organs in order to sustain life. So that kind of ties in with that. And then the pro-life guy's response to me was, this was his example. If you put a baby in a bathtub and you have to use your organs to lift the baby out of the bathtub. And I was like, yeah, but caretaking is, in my opinion, not the same thing as something, I don't like to say parasitic because that sounds really inhumane, but it kind of is in a sense. Like you're the host and it's living off of you. So I felt like that's a false equivalency. And the guy even says you use your heart to lift a baby. And I was like, do you really use your heart to lift a baby? I mean, your heart's technically pumping blood. But I mean, I don't know.
Sure.
I just got some interesting comments there. So
yeah,
can we run through?
Yeah, we can run through some of these and then kind of talk about them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm kind of breaking out the different points that you're saying. So the first thing that you bring up, I would argue, and I believe we'll come to an agreement on this, that intent doesn't really matter that much. So in the first one, you talk about how, like, well, when you have an abortion, it's not like you're doing it maliciously. You're not, like, intending to kill the fetus. You're just trying to alleviate yourself of a pregnancy that you don't really want, right?
Yes.
I mean, I would argue that if you would use that type of terminology with anything else, I don't think we would allow that to happen. So, for instance, let's say I'm driving down the freeway and I'm just done dealing with my kid because he's being obnoxious, and I just open the door and kind of like push him out, and I keep driving. Like, the intent isn't that, like, I really want to kill my son. It's just like I'm kind of just done dealing with him and I don't want to worry about it anymore. So I just kind of like, knock him out on the freeway and let him roll around or whatever until he dies. I don't think like we would accept that as like an argument, right? Do you agree, or do you think that's disanalogous, or?
I mean, I agree to a certain extent. The only thing I can say is that when you sign I hate to make it personal, but I know you have a son. When you signed his birth certificate, I mean, you assume some sort of paternal rights, and you are legally responsible to make sure that he is safe. And once again, he's an independent being at that point that isn't biologically dependent off of someone else. But sex isn't really a legal contract. So you aren't necessarily legally bound to make sure that fetus is cared for at all times. So once again, like pushing a kid out the car, even if you don't want him to roll in the road and get hit by a car, you just want him out of the car. It's still, to me, it's slightly it's slightly different just based on that alone, because you have that paternal right?
Yeah. So
He
I can
agreed
understand that, but then we're moving on to like, we're kind of like moving on to another topic, right? So like we
okay.
can agree that like the intent isn't really relevant here because we wouldn't really, I'm just trying to move through the arguments one at a time. We would never
Yeah.
use like intent. Like if I wanted to drop off my 1-year-old kid in a dumpster, we would never say like, well, the intent isn't to kill somebody. We're just done with it, right? I'm just trying to move past like the intent thing, right? That we're using that as a proxy for other issues.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Okay. So the first argument was intent. The second thing that you brought up was that the one problem with a fetus is that you can't like transfer it, that you're kind of stuck with it until for at least 9 months or whatever. I think that this kind of ties into your biological impact argument, that there's a greater biological impact of a child there's a greater biological impact of having a fetus implanted in you versus an actual child that exists separate of yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I can acknowledge that, obviously, I have to acknowledge that both of these are true. One, that a child living inside of you is going to have a much greater biological impact, and that you have no alternative to having someone else watch it or care for it while it's inside of you. And that, two, that a child inside of you has a greater impact on your body than a child outside. However, so now my question becomes, in order to make terminating this acceptable under most moral systems, I would argue that you have to demonstrate something that is egregious enough that killing something is a way to alleviate, I guess, whatever injustice or whatever, or whatever aggression you feel is presented to you. So, for instance, my question would be then that if we consider a fetus a human, which you haven't considered that yet, and we can go back to that one too, but if you do consider a fetus a human, is the discomfort that you feel for some number of months while pregnant, does it make it justified that you should be able to kill a person to alleviate yourself of that temporary discomfort?
See, to me, that's kind of like when you get into morality and it's kind of subjective and all that.
Well, so my subjective assumptions here, and if you disagree with me, if I'm talking and I ever say anything you disagree with, just stop me immediately and we can go over things. So in terms of like subjective morality here, right? What I'm assuming is, one, murdering is wrong, where murder is defined as the unjust killing of another person, and then wrong is in it's like morally unacceptable, not legally or whatever, but we would consider this to be morally wrong. So, and then person is anything from a zygote up to the termination of your brain or whatever. So if I believe that we share the values that murdering people is wrong, that if we agree that murdering people is wrong, and we agree that killing a fetus, terminating a pregnancy is murdering a person, then I feel like in order to make this not murder, where murder is defined as the unjustified killing of somebody, we have to present something that thing is doing or aggressing in a certain way that makes that killing justified. So, for instance, somebody breaks into my house, I can murder that person because they're threatening my life or whatever, right? However, I don't believe that in most cases a fetus is warranting being murdered because it's kind of using your body for up to some number of months. Now, I will make obvious concessions here. If the mother has a high likelihood of dying during birth, or there's like an additional complication or something like that, of course, then I would immediately say yeah. But in general,
I think
even
most pro-lifers actually agree with that too. Like it's only like the extreme fundamentalist Christians that are like, nope, that's God's will. But,
So my question is like, how do you justify killing something because it causes a temporary discomfort?
Well, the best way that I can put it is, here we go into the sociopathy, I guess, to a certain extent, is I value a fetus less than I would a living person. And you're going to hear the typical stuff, the viability, the sentience and everything, because fetuses, not only do they're not able to feel pain. They're not conscious. They have no friends, family, anything. To me, I know it's a biological reality, but I just don't see any true suffering besides just the I guess by definition, this is life. Because I mean, if you were to go kill someone down the street, I mean, they may be a dick or whatever, but you're causing them physical harm. I mean, they have relationships with other people. They probably have a job. They may have kids of their own. But a fetus is, and here's a cliche, it is a life. I will not deny that. I'm not one of those people that say fetuses aren't alive. But it is technically a life, but literally its only existence is it's physically there in a uterus, and it's just cell dividing. And like I said, it can't feel anything. It can't feel on an emotional level and a physical level. So I don't necessarily see anything morally wrong with ending that life if there's no other option. Like I said, if there are artificial wombs and there is a whole movement of people that were totally willing to adopt, I think that that would be the ideal thing to do, because it just seems more empathetic and nice, I guess, unless it was a huge problem and there's just overpopulation everywhere. But I guess that's my reasoning for not needing a good reason to terminate a pregnancy. So maybe there's some logical inconsistencies there, and if you could bring those out to me, I'm open to hearing it.
Sure. So
But
let me just let me poke around a little bit. So
okay.
firstly, you say that a fetus is unequal to a living person, that you would grant different levels of consideration to these two things. This is a point that I would 100% agree with. If I could pose a hypothetical, let's say there is if somebody went to deliver a baby, let's say there's a 50% chance the fetus dies during delivery, and there's like an 80% chance that the person dies during delivery, or I'm sorry, even more. Let's say there's a 50% chance the fetus dies, but there's like a 20% chance the person dies. I would say like abort every single time, because like you have a person that's alive and already like made it through childbirth and all that shit. Like I would never sacrifice that person for a fetus, right? So when we're talking about like equal, or like I would probably prefer the life of like a 2-year-old to like a fetus, like just because it's already made it through that, and less risk and all that shit, right? So like I would agree that if we were talking about enacting the same action on two things that get different moral, I guess, like consideration, that I would prefer one or the other. But I think that one problem we run into here is that these are not the same act. So for instance, if you talked about aborting a child to save a mother, that is something that I would get on board with 100% of the time. I would always prefer that. But if you talk about aborting a child to provide a convenience to the mother, then I think we're talking about very uneven acts. So now we have to justify committing a much greater moral wrong, you would say, against an unborn child in order to prevent basically an inconvenience to the mother. And I think this becomes much harder to justify.
Yeah. But doesn't that convenience kind of stand on a sliding scale? I mean, just for example, let's just throw out let's have 2 examples. Okay, so there's Jane. Jane is a trust fund kid. Her dad makes $300,000 a year. She's got it. She's got the white privilege. She's got everything. And she got knocked up by her boyfriend. And though she's not doing too well, that baby will be provided for. But she just doesn't want to ruin her body. And she doesn't really like the boyfriend all too much. And she just wanted to have an abortion. Would you hold that to the same standard as opposed to, let's say, a single mom who already has 2 children, who lives paycheck to paycheck, doesn't have sick leave at her job where she can take off to go to the checkups and get maybe she lives in Section 8 housing, because Section 8 housing has limits for amount of kids you can have. If you have a 2-bedroom, you can't have 3 kids. I know this. I work in the social services field, so I kind of know all those interesting things. So in that scenario, she's kind of backed into a shitty corner where not only to me, it's almost more of, I feel like saying an inconvenience is kind of the wrong word in that scenario, because this person really, like, this could potentially fuck up her life and her 2 existing children's life if they were to get kicked off the Section 8 because she's storing another baby, or if she misses work and she doesn't have enough money to pay the bills, or so like I said, and the situation really just depends on that person and their scenario. So I feel like just saying, oh, well, this woman is having an abortion for any other reason than because it's a threat in her life, like, I feel like there's more of a spectrum on that. The selfishness. I mean, at that point, when you're worried about your 2 other children and keeping food in their bellies and keeping a roof over their head, like, to me, that's kind of almost, it's a necessary evil, and it's not, like, inconvenience is not the right word. Would you agree there?
No, but I can understand why you take issue with the word. I mean, like, I would say it's an extreme inconvenience. When I say convenience, what the reason why I say convenience, and so I understand what your issue with the word is, that in common parlance, when we use convenience, you make it sound like, oh, like I've got to walk to the store to buy a candy bar instead of driving. Like that's inconvenient. I acknowledge that the way that I use inconvenience here is quite a bit more extreme, that being pregnant for 9 months is extremely inconvenient compared to like having to walk to the store to buy a candy bar. But the reason why I use convenience here is because it's not generally a matter of life or death. So you've given me a lot of reasons why a person might be more likely to have an abortion or how their outcomes could be greater as a result of that, which obviously I wouldn't disagree with anything you've just said. The only thing I'm uncomfortable though with is that you're essentially justifying murder by saying that an inconvenience of a certain extremeness could justify the murder of this person. So for instance, like let's say that every argument that you just gave me, I could apply that to a 1-year-old and every argument would still hold true. Like, well, they can't really afford feeding their kid. The kid is starting to get hungry. They've got diapers and shit. And it's just a big disaster. Like, fuck, like maybe they should just kill the kid because like it's an extreme inconvenience and it's causing problems for literally everybody involved in this person's life. So I feel like so I feel like using convenience as an argument here on whether or not we want to terminate somebody's existence, I don't think any level of inconvenience can overcome the hurdle of this is now a justification to murder someone, in my opinion.
I mean, it's hard for me. I feel like we kind of go in circles at this point because I would kind of go back to if she went through the pregnancy and she knew she couldn't care for the 1-year-old, at that point she should have gave the baby up for adoption or just safe haven did or see if there's anyone, you could even do like foster care for a while. Now, I'm not too familiar with like I said, each state has different laws, but there are certain states where you can just go in and say like, I can't handle this kid. I need you to take custody of him until I get into a better place. So I feel like there's other options there. So that's the only thing I really disagree with what you're saying in terms of like, oh, this little baby's an inconvenience, so I'm going to kill the little baby versus a fetus, which,
you don't think,
like I said,
you don't think you could compel a person to carry it to term and then give it up for adoption afterwards?
I mean, it really just depends on the situation. Like for example, I've never had an abortion. If I did, I'd admit it. But and I'm not going to give you a story. But at one point in time, which is actually how I became a fan of you, because you're JF Steph and his little girlfriend. Yeah. I work with that, or worked. I don't work there anymore because it was too stressful. I worked for a center for people with developmental disabilities. I was a case manager and I managed about 15 different homes where I felt like I was their mother. And this was the type of job where I had to work round the clock. One time I got a call at 1 o'clock in the morning. One of my staff, they busted their head open. There was blood everywhere. I had to beat the ambulance to the house. Like I had a really, 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 really stressful job. So, and I had bills to pay. I wasn't getting paid much. My husband actually makes less money than me. We're living paycheck to paycheck. I just feel that there's no way, like no matter how much anyone else would have tried to convince me, unless somebody gave me like here's $1 million carried to term, sure, then I'd do that. But it wouldn't have fit my lifestyle. It just would have been undoable. I would have got behind at the job by taking the sick time, and then potentially they would have worded it, oh, not that she's pregnant, it's that she's performing bad. And I could have lost my job, which, obviously, that spirals into lose your job, lose your apartment, lose your car, all that kind of thing. So in that scenario, if I would have gotten pregnant, I mean, I would have felt like sometimes you hear the scenario of the woman being caught in the bear trap, like that's how I would have felt, where I really wouldn't have had any other options. Now, obviously, later on, I just found another job and I'm in a much better place now, so that wouldn't be the situation. But if that would have happened then, I really don't think there's a single person on this planet, like I said, with the exception of someone offering me a huge sum of money where I could just quit the job and then, I couldn't imagine any sort of like philosophical or like political argument that would have convinced me otherwise. Like maybe
sure,
I'm a sociopath.
Like, no, like I understand. I totally understand what you're saying. And obviously, well, I don't want to say that, but I understand what you're saying. I guess it's just at this point, you're essentially justifying like killing somebody, right? Is the only thing that I'm saying. And that in general, that just makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But I mean, you can do it. You can go that road. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would just argue from a moral point of view that, like, because and again, like, it sounds mean to use this word, but you're really talking about like a matter of convenience. Your life would become significantly less convenient had you had a kid. Like, now it would suck, you know, the job shit and everything, like a bear trap and all that. But you're still not a matter of like you're literally going to die if you do this. It's just you're talking about like extreme inconvenience at this point. And I just, for me, I don't think that, and in general, I think most people would agree that extreme inconvenience isn't quite enough to get to the point where, well, I can kill somebody to avoid this extreme inconvenience.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I can see where you're coming from, and maybe it is pointless to have this debate, but I guess I think where our biggest disagreement is, you know, I feel like you have a solid fundamental, you know, just set in stone, you know, this is a human life. I'm assuming you believe, some people are different. I'm guessing you're a conception person, because I know some people are like, will even go as far as to say fertilization.
Well, that's conception to me. The moment the zygote is formed, right? Fertilization.
Well, fertilization is when the sperm and the egg unite, but that is not conception. Conception is when the fertilized egg attaches to the uterine wall, because there's actually tons of sperm that meet eggs that don't actually implant on the uterine wall. So
okay,
that's conception.
Gotcha.
Because
gotcha.
But some people,
I wasn't aware of that.
So okay, that's cool. But what I'm saying is, some more extreme pro-lifers will argue that forms of birth control and the morning after pill are abortion as well, because you're flushing out fertilized eggs. But the morning after pill, all it does is prevent the implant. Sorry, I'm saying that right. Prevent conception. So like I said, it really just depends.
Sure.
So some people don't know the difference. Hell, some people say that masturbating is a form of abortion. So
which I think is ridiculous, because you're never a sperm and you're never an egg. It's not until those two things come together.
But you know, religious folk be crazy, you know.
Sure, yeah. I feel like if you do this argument with people, I think you have to find some way to define the fetus as a non-person, because if you give up, if you concede that the fetus is a life, then I can always, or other people can always draw analogs to like 1 or 2 year olds, and it becomes very difficult at that point to win the argument. Or if you want to go extreme, you can actually concede the 2-year-old thing, where if somebody says, well, okay, well, if an extreme inconvenience and leeching off of you is enough to kill a fetus, why can't I say the same about a 1 or 2-year-old? And you could say, well, you could, fuck it. I think you should be able to abort children up to like 2 years old, or maybe even up to, as extreme as it sounds, up to 16 or 17 until they become able to live on their own, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, there's people all over the spectrum. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that, but, you know, people are entitled to their strange opinions. They're all over the place. I mean,
sure.
Look at the alt-right.
Yeah.
They exist. But, let's see. I don't want to get too off track here. Fuck. And I just lost my train of thought.
We were talking about conceding the fetus as a person, and that's probably not a...
Okay. Personhood. So, like I said, there's all sorts of people on the pro-choice side. There's all sorts of arguments that I don't like at all. And one of, you know, of course, I think I mentioned this already. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but some people say it's not a life. I absolutely define it as a life. But I kind of think of personhood as kind of a bit more subjective. I feel like that's a little bit more, you know, debatable. Sorry for the noise. My cat is currently destroying my wall.
No, that's fine.
If I yell at him, and he won't stop. So I feel personhood kind of exists once a fetus is able to sustain life on its own. And to me, that's not necessarily true, because I'm not a fan of late-term abortion. My whole thing is, if something happens, this is incredibly rare anyway, like the myth of 9-month elective abortions is kind of absurd. That's like less than 1% of abortions. But hypothetically, say for some reason, some woman's like, you know, 38 weeks, and she's like, I don't want it anymore. Like at that point, it seems like you should just kind of induce, because I mean, a lot of babies are born that way. So I would say that, right? Just try to induce and then let the state take over. So I mean, I'm not a big fan of just like, you know, ripping the throats out of 9-month-old fetuses. Like, but I think realistically, most people, from my understanding, I don't have the research pulled up in front of me, but most people wait long in pregnancies because of money. Because I mean, I know you are probably aware of the Hyde Amendment. You can't get any government funding to help with abortion.
Yeah.
Lifers get a lot of clinics shut down. Like, for example, I live in Louisiana, and there are currently 2 clinics in Louisiana. And then we have those waiting periods and all sorts of stuff. And then they have crisis pregnancy centers everywhere. So there's a lot of roadblocks that lead. So someone might find out they're pregnant at 5 weeks, but money, travel, hotel, all that kind of stuff leads to later pregnancies. And then, of course, just lack of education, because it blows my mind, because I knew how people got pregnant when I was like 12. But then again, I grew up in a middle-class family, and I went to a private school, and I was educated. So I knew that. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that are at the age where they're having sex, and they still don't really know how pregnancy works. And that's depressing.
Yeah, if the girl is on top, you can't get pregnant. Or if you have sex in a
Yeah.
bathtub, you can't get... Yeah, I've heard a lot of really stupid shit like this, yeah.
Dude, it's just gravity, man.
Yeah.
It's like, no. And honestly, those are the people, honestly, probably be having most abortions, in my opinion. But yeah, like, I don't mean to cast blame on the pro-life community as a whole, because ultimately it is still the pro-choice person that's having the abortion who made the choice. I just think if we want to eliminate late-term pregnancies, putting a bunch of roadblocks in the way would probably stop that, and more sex education, and free birth control, free pregnancy testing.
Yeah, we're
all that
probably...
kind of
I don't
stuff.
think we're going to disagree on any of these empirical points. This is why I'm very cautious to identify as pro-life, because most other pro-lifers are fucking so stupid. Because most people are pro-life, or a lot of the people that are pro-life are evangelical, so they'll be opposed to things like contraception or sex education, which are like empirically demonstrated ways to reduce the number of abortions. So it doesn't make any fucking sense. Yeah, or opposed to things that make like pregnancy easier, like funding for children, or funding for women that are currently working or whatever, to take off time from work to deal with their child, and then the years following. Like, Republicans seem to only care about children up until they're born, and then at that point they don't give a fuck. And it's like, yeah, really bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cut Medicaid, no food stamps, no housing vouchers. You're supposed to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they're very, very concerned until the baby comes out, then they don't care. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's the sad thing. So that's the only time I will credit is the ones who actually attempt to help struggling mothers. So like, I don't necessarily agree with them, but that's at least there's some consistency there. Like, I'll give them that. But I guess unless you have anything else, you had questions for me. The only other thing, the bug I have to pick with you would be, like, technically, do you define yourself as pro-life?
Not real. I mean, like, morally or ethically, I would argue that I'm opposed to unjustified murders. Murders are by definition unjustified, and I view abortion generally, if there's not a life at risk or some sort of like equal exchange of like life, then I would consider it to be murder, and I'm generally opposed to murder. But in terms of like pragmatic like policy, I don't think you can actually make abortions legal, if for no other reason, because one, I'm not comfortable imposing that moral decision on other people. I don't think I have the authority to do that, and two, because people will get abortions regardless. And there's no way to legislate it, and you might as well do it in the safety of a hospital or something rather than in a fucking alley. So yeah, I would never be. I don't think I'm opposed to like if it's legal and we've decided as a society it's legal, putting roadblocks and everything in front of it is very, very, very fucked up, I think.
Yeah, but the only thing, but that would still kind of make you pro-choice though, because that's.
Yeah, it becomes a semantics thing. It's how you define it. Like, I mean, like legislatively, I'm pro-choice. Morally, I guess I'm pro-life. Or I should say legislatively, I'm pro-abortion, and then morally, I'm anti-abortion, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, my best friend actually has the exact same opinion as you. She's like, I want it completely legal, never have one. I try my best to talk them out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but she still identifies as pro-choice. So that's what kind of threw me off. Because like I said, I kind of heard you talk about it before, but then I've heard you in other debates refer to yourself as pro-life. So that's why I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, it just depends on if I'm having a debate on ethics or a debate on like legislation or whatever. It depends on what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just got a message from one of my friends who's watching this. He wants me to say this.
Oh boy. If it's a gnome thing, I'm hanging up on you.
It's a gnome.
Just a dumb stream me.
Oh no, this is my cousin. He's actually he's smarter than I am. He should have called in.
Okay.
fetus is alive like a cell is alive like a plant cell or a cancer cell, that is not equivalent to thinking and breathing.
So
Breathing cognitive person. That's him
yeah,
saying that.
yeah,
Not
I
me.
understand. No, I understand. A lot of people will do kind of like this trait argument for how to get to like making it so abortion is okay. I'm just uncomfortable because I can't find a consistent set of characteristics that define you as a human, and I'm not comfortable with the transitionary period as well. So, for instance, if his argument is something like, well, brain function is what makes you a human, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that like at a very specific moment in time, my brain functions, but I could have been killed like a second before then, and then that would have been okay. But like the second after, all of a sudden it's not okay because something kicked on. I view like the potential to grow into like a person as like still being something worthy of moral consideration, but that's what I would argue. But other people, I mean, like that's probably not even a good. There's a lot of really interesting writing on whether or not you can consider the morality of an unperson or somebody that doesn't exist yet, and I think a lot of people disagree with that. So like, I mean, there's legitimate arguments to be had there, but I'm just not comfortable with like that a specific trait all of a sudden like creates you into being a human, but before that trait developed, you were something different, I guess. Yeah.
And you're pretty set on the conception, which is
well,
just
because it seems to be like the most common, it seems to be the most consistent answer that who I am, right? I guess the most unique thing about me that I identify with in some regards is my genetic code, my genome, and like that's formed at the moment the zygote forms. So I mean, like that's like the earliest part. If I were to trace back my existence, that would be the moment of my existence is when that happens. So
I mean, yeah, like I said, it's understandable. I guess I just kind of as a process, and I wouldn't deny for 5 seconds that conception is a very important moment. But I mean, just from and I'm not a biology person. I don't want to give off that impression that I'm some super intellectual, because I'm not. But to me, I just kind of like I know I'm kind of stealing from George Carlin here. It's like life is a process.
Sure.
So, you know, like for someone to take unless you're one of the extremists, but like for someone to take a morning after pill and have no issue with that, but then like have an abortion, take the abortion pill, for example, 3 weeks later, I don't really see much of a difference. That's just, and I don't think there's really much where we could debate at any further to convince each other, because I feel like you're pretty set in your ways, and I appreciate the conversation, because I feel like most of the time when I have conversations with people, it's fucking stupid.
Sure.
So that's why I wanted to have, not saying that all pro-lifers are stupid, but I've like I said, the guy
most of them are.
the guy who literally compared picking a baby out of a bathtub as using your heart, and I was like, okay, dude, I can't have this conversation, man. But I guess that's pretty much it. The only other thing I wanted, since I have you online here, is I kind of wanted to bring up, I know it might be kind of old news, but probably at least 7 or 8 months ago at this point, and I'm sure you're aware, it was the debate where it was like you, Lauren Southern's, ContraPoints was there, Theron Martin was there.
Blair White, Nick Fuentes, I think, yeah.
I don't know. I think it was Lauren Southern. I think Blair White was the one where they're all bitching at you about pedophilia.
No, you're right. That was a different one. You're right. Sorry.
This was the one thing I just wanted to bring up, just because, and once again, I know I'm sounding all virtue signaling because I work in social services, but there was one point that made me, I had to literally pause the video and go smoke a cigarette because it pissed me off, because once again, it's no bullshit. He's a fucking idiot. When I look at his sub count, it makes me feel sad.
Which one?
He's such a no bullshit, just his sub count in general.
Yeah, that guy is exploding in popularity. I don't understand either, because people are fucking stupid.
He's a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Oh my god, he's stupid.
He's one of the dumbest people I've ever spoken to. It's actually astounding how stupid he is. Like, I legitimately think that, like, if he were to go and get tested, I think he could qualify as having a mental illness based on his IQ, like of having some like disability. I don't even mean that like in like an ableist kind of way. I legitimately think that he would. Like, he has an inability to hypothesize. Like, he is like so dumb. But his channel growth is really good. He's like explosively like popular, and he's growing and growing and growing. I don't know how. It really blows my mind.
The only thing I could possibly say is that I guess maybe he's good at, making the videos, the editing software.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like he just spits out like the standard anti-SJW talking points, and then his voice sounds okay, so people like that. But I legitimately do think he would score like probably like 85 or 90 like on an IQ test or lower. Like he would get like down into like the mental retardation range. I think he could.
JF might go after him, but no, he's not gay.
He's not gay because he can't spread his genes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be degeneracy.
Yeah.
But no, but I know I brought him up, but the thing that made me laugh the most was I think it was Theron who was bringing up it was kind of Blair versus Nick Fuentes, talking about women who don't want children at all,
Mm-hmm.
and no bullshit's like, well, you know, some people regret having kids, but no one regrets having them. And that was the point where I had to go outside. And I was like, dude, have you ever heard of child murder? Have you ever
Yeah.
heard of child abandonment? I mean, call Child Protective Services. I guarantee you they will have a few words that there are plenty people that regret their children. It's just extremely taboo to just open with it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably one of the most taboo things to say is I regret having my children. I mean, but there are plenty of people who do. They just tend to either, do something crazy or come to like, message boards and stuff and vent. So I don't know. I just thought that was probably one of the stupidest things I heard, just besides, Nick Fuentes's
Standard Christian rhetoric.
yeah, standard Christian shit. Women belong in the home, and no woman would rather be punching numbers in the computer versus being at home with her kids.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I'm not going to deny for 5 seconds that a lot of women have the urges, and by all means, like, live and let live. That's my whole spew. Like, if you want to have kids, have kids. If you have the means and you have a stable mind, breed, have as many kids as you want. But just, I hate the Nick Fuenteses and all those type of people who want to say whether you're having an abortion or not. I'm not really trying to tie this to abortion. I'm kind of moving on. Just people who electively choose not to have kids for whatever reason. We don't need to have a reason. I feel like a lot of people, especially those kind of people, want to shit all over our choices, and they think it's the liberal media brainwashing us. And it's like, okay, well, if they have all these guys in suits who sit up in these skyscrapers figuring ways out for people to not have kids, which makes no sense because you need people to buy products and blah, 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 blah. But why is it not working on the overwhelming majority of people? Like, most people still want and have kids.
Yeah.
That's a very small amount of people. And I guess I just got kind of personal with that because I personally, I'm only 28. I know I still have 5 years to change my mind, but I personally don't want kids. So I was triggered by them being insulted by my experience. Like, something must have happened to me. I must have been raped or beaten or something.
Yeah.
I'm a broken
Well,
woman.
the ultra ironic thing is that all the women that exist in this movement also constantly contradicted as well, right? Lauren Southern hasn't had kids yet. She has no excuse. Roman Millennial hasn't had kids yet. She has no excuse. Both of these people are well past Christian childbearing age, but it's kind of funny that they make excuses for themselves, but not.
I'm just focusing on my career. Like,
well, that was yeah.
Feminist of you?
That was like the ultimate. Yeah, it is. What you just said was a feminist thing. Like, I'm putting off childbearing things to focus on my career. Like, thanks, Lauren Southern. You just made the argument for every single woman that disagrees with your videos. But I mean, yeah.
I think, like, even Roosh V, who I hate with every fiber of my being, he kind of called out, and broken clock. But I thought that was actually pretty cool. Bullshit. It's like, oh yeah, you're this trad girl. Well, why aren't you married with kids?
Yeah.
And she even made that one video saying that, with the red pill sexual market value, that women hit the wall at 25. It's like, all right, you better hurry up, Lauren. You better have a kid, otherwise contradicting your own videos you make money off of. So it's like, whatever, man.
Yep.
I don't know. Those people are crazy. Props to putting up with them. But yeah, so I won't keep you much longer. I know you got probably a line of other people to argue with. So do you mind if I plug my little shitty channel?
Knock yourself out, dude.
All right. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I once was a victim of the anti-SJW crowd, and my videos started off as me just kind of playing a comedy character mocking extreme feminists, but I kind of dropped that about 6 months ago, and I'm trying to do more serious videos. But yeah, just look up TheMedsPeds, and that's like I just do typical videos where I respond to other people, and sometimes I talk about myself. But I'm really struggling. I mean, I have a full-time job. I don't make But hey, who knows? Maybe if I get a little bigger one day, I can make a little extra money doing it. So, yeah, appreciated having this conversation. I hope I didn't sound as stupid as some of your callers. But
All right. Well,
yeah,
hey,
I appreciate it.
Thanks for the conversation, buddy. Be careful.
All right.
All right.
Talk to you later.
See you
Bye.
later. Good job, guys. We did it. All right.